Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to present to you about some issues around interoperability for scholarly publishing. I, my organization, the National Information Standards Organization, develops technical standards for publishers, libraries, and technical software providers that serve those communities. And at the moment, artificial intelligence has been kind of the primary topic that has been discussed in many meetings across our community for the last several years. As was noted, scholarly publishers are rapidly adopting and applying artificial intelligence tools in various workflows and business processes in their publication businesses. I'm going to talk a little bit about what publishers are doing with artificial intelligence systems, and then get into some questions about what are some of the opportunities to standardize activities across the publishing community so that we can present a unified face to the readers, the researchers who are using the content that we are creating. And there are many applications of AI in research and scholarly publishing, and there are a variety of approaches to using this technology for things like research support, knowledge discovery, how publishers recruit authors, how to develop new products. But today, I'm primarily going to focus on the interoperability issues and community awareness around artificial intelligence as it's used in scholarly publishing. I'm going to start first by listing some of the applications, particularly focused on that the publishing side of peer review, a number of, as was just discussed by Dr. Yamamoto, how publishers are using AI systems in the peer review process. They're also using AI systems in editorial support. So doing that first pass of manuscript review. Certainly not the full editorial review, but there are sort of pre-checks that have been being used with AI tools. Publishers are also using AI tools to create metadata to describe both the article, the research, the associated elements of an article. We're also using AI tools for accessibility and alt text generation, so describing the images that are associated with a research paper. Certainly, art integrity, plagiarism detections, again, some of the things that Dr. Yamamoto just discussed. It's also being transforming how search and discovery is happening in the research ecosystem. And then also how these research outputs are assessed in research assessment processes and thinking about tenure, promotion, et cetera. I'm not going to get into any of those specific details. I'm going to focus more here on what the community of publishers and researchers need when it comes to these AI applications and how they are used in scholarly publishing. And I'm going to do this thinking about a variety of different areas in which AI is used and how we can think about some standards needs that should be developed. I want to be very clear that what I'm going to list in the next several slides as I talk through each of these issues are not yet agreed upon. These are nascent needs as we start thinking about how AI systems will transform the creation, distribution, and discovery, and even preservation of information. How do we understand collectively the terminology we're using, what kind of disclosures are necessary, how content could or should be ingested into AI systems, how is content licensed once it's published to AI tool providers? How is content referenced in AI outputs? How are we managing the flow of content that is being consumed by the next generation of AI agents? And then thinking again about what are the implications for how this is used and how do we track things and report on them? So I'm going to get into a little bit more detail of each of these things in the next several minutes. So a, a lot of the things that we are dealing with today with regard to artificial intelligence systems are nascent technologies. And there is a variety of terms used in this space that have very inconsistent usage when talking about what these AI systems are doing, how they're working. We need to establish consistent definitions about core concepts. What exactly do we mean when we talk about training systems or fine-tuning them, post-training tuning, retrieval augmented generation systems? What do we mean when we talk about agents? We need to develop controlled vocabularies for these different roles and systems components so that there's a common understanding about what technologies we're talking about, how these are using content, how the systems are interacting, and maintain version glossaries over time because this space is moving so rapidly that what we mean today isn't necessarily what will be how the technologies will be applied in 6, 9, 24 months from now. It is also critically important to think about not only what are the rules about disclosure of the use of artificial intelligence in the writing process, but how do we signal that to the end user, the readers of this content? So user-facing disclosures that indicate when AI systems are used to generate, summarize, translate, or even recommend content. Because disclosure here is going to be critically important. And it's every tool we are using if we're using an Office word processing program, there's probably AI systems in the back of that. How do we define what thresholds are needed for disclosure? Is it fully generated, or was it just AI helped me in my editorial workflows to put together the manuscript? Did it help tweak my language to improve it into English or other languages? Or did I just go and ask a chatbot to generate a ream of text? And how do we also then think about how to translate those, once we have those disclosure statements, how do we make them machine readable so that they can be ingested into discovery systems? Say, I don't want to read anything that wasn't fully human generated. How can we develop transparency audits and compliance checks that are automated based on this information? Now, another significant issue as it relates to artificial intelligence systems is how these systems are crawling and ingesting content. Variety of reports over the last several months have indicated that the rate at which machines are reading content is skyrocketing, and human-generated traffic is dropping significantly as a percentage of all of the usage. So how do we create metadata signals that say or restrict how AIs can use, train, and ingest the content? And how do we align those signals with existing metadata frameworks? We don't want to create an entirely new model for rights, expressions, licenses, and embargoes. And of course, these systems need to support both human reading so that I, as a reader of a journal article, can recognize some of these rights and restrictions, but also that they are machine readable so that the agents and the robots can understand them as they go forward. And of course, how do we create enforcement mechanisms? Part of the challenge today is the standard website robots.txt files are being completely ignored by agents and AI tools. As publishers are also in the business of distributing this content, we're in an environment where every publisher has to negotiate an individual license with every tool provider. And it's creating a lot of friction in the legal process. Again, a lot of these tools, a lot of these licenses begin with a non-disclosure agreement. So you can't take the learning that I had dealing with this AI agent and move it to a different a different negotiation because I'm not allowed to disclose it. How can we define some of the clauses that would go into those contracts around attribution, expectations of recognition of authorship in AI outputs? And how do we build together this license model so that we can scale it from single works to large repositories of data? Another truly important thing that Dr. Yamamoto mentioned, but I think this is also critically important as we think about tools that generate scholarly outputs. How do we standardize the citation formats that are related to that output? If a tool provides reference to a paper, how do we signal that to the user? How do we link it back to the source? Because what we want to do is build in confidence of the provenance of the information that the AI systems are using to direct retrieval, paraphrasing, how to infer meaning out of these systems. Because it all goes back to researchers are certainly not paid generally for producing a research output, but they're compensated though by the recognition to their work, which relies on this infrastructure of linking back to the source materials. And if AI systems don't get this linking element correct, we're breaking that chain of references. We're breaking the system of recognition that motivates authors to write papers in the first place. Over the last several months, there's been a lot of talk about agents and how different AI-based agents and robots are crawling content, but how do we support that access? How do we build into the agent of a notion of they have permission to read things, subscribed content? What do we also need to define models that govern what agents can do? Can they just read content? Can they also replicate it? Could they summarize it? Could they execute code across the data that's associated with a paper? So how do we build credentials into those tools? Because increasingly, institutions will have a variety of agents that their faculty will be allowed to use, and how do we associate those tools with an institution that has subscribed access? And then finally, thinking about how we are reporting on the usage of content using AI systems is a critically important element here, because for the last 25 years of online content distribution, we have exclusively tried to track human usage while discounting and even ignoring machine-based usage. But in a world where 50, 60, 70% of usage nowadays is through machines, how do we develop metrics to track that access? How do we define formats for reporting on and an auditing process about what these agents and bots are doing in reading content on people's behalf or reading for machine aggregation purposes? And how do we do that also in a privacy protected way so we can aggregate usage without exposing proprietary or personal information? All of these issues are things that we are going to be spending weeks, months, years trying to address. And I'm going to talk here just briefly about one example of how these systems are interconnected uh, by focusing in the last couple minutes here on a recently advanced protocol, the Model Context Protocol, which is an open standard to interface large language models and other information systems. And how do you do that in a secure, predictable way to connect tools and databases, files, and services? So think about peer review services or reference link checking services. And the MCP protocol specifies what is known as context, sort of memory of this is what I'm trying to do across multiple systems, across multiple tools and environments. How is that provided on demand? So in a one-on-one instantaneous relationship between different systems, and how do you deal with permissions, API interactions that allow enterprises, businesses, publishers, editorial offices to manage access, log it, comply with requirements and contracts and the like. Unfortunately, there are several concerns about this new protocol and how it's being used in the community. The communication between different AI systems relies on a fairly complicated architectural system to integrate those tools together. And this protocol slows those systems down. There are performance considerations here. We're also kind of in a situation of potential risk in that there could be developing competing protocols and implementations that are like MCP but different for different silos. You could imagine different tool providers saying, well, MCP was developed by Anthropic, but we would rather use Microsoft or Google, and they create their own ecosystems. And this gets to a real question here about some of these developing technologies in our space. Who is putting these protocols together? In a lot of our community, particularly in the tech community right now, different communities, while they might be open, they're still inherently controlled by the primary designer, whoever's maintaining it, or the reference implementer. And that's exerting control, a kind of lock-in that a lot of these tech companies are interested in pursuing. How do we ensure that we don't get into a system where these technologies are governed by corporate interests rather than community interests? This has always been the case with every technology, but I think it's particularly concerning at the moment with how quickly the technologies are advancing and the interoperability needs between these different communities. How do we ensure that it's open from a standards perspective in terms of governance, in terms of management, engagement in its development, that are ways in which we can help avoid some of the vendor lock-in situations that have existed across technologies over many years. And the one last thing I'm going to end on here is just these technologies are rapidly advancing. And if you in your organization are going to adopt these tools, it's likely that the worst AI tools that you will ever have to deal with are the ones you're using today. And in the future, those tools will get better and better and better. I kind of think of digitization projects that happened back in 2000. As imaging technologies improved, people had to go back and re-digitize them. I don't suggest that you should hesitate here with these tools, but plan on having to implement them again or improve them and iterate them in your operations as you move forward, because these technologies are changing so rapidly. You don't want to have to wait 6, 9, 12 months because the technologies will have rapidly evolved over that time. So thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have.